Good evening, welcome to a special report. I'm Bret Baier. We begin with a massively controversial decision by President Trump that has ramifications all over the world tonight. He is expected to announce in a speech tomorrow the start of the process of recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and moving the U.S. Embassy there from Tel Aviv. World leaders are already warning of severe consequences, and U.S. facilities in the Middle East are stepping up security tonight. We're being told U.S. Marine fast teams have bolstered security at several U.S. embassies in the region right now. Correspondent Connor Powell starts us off tonight from Jerusalem.
White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders previewing the president's decision on moving the U.S. Embassy in Israel, a step that would upend decades worth of American foreign policy when President Trump announces tomorrow his intention to move the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. The move ends the long-time policy that Jerusalem's final status would be determined by peace talks. President Trump called several world leaders earlier today, including Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, to brief them on the move, which radically reshapes future negotiations. Abbas rejected in a statement the move and said it will have a detrimental consequence on the peace process and the prospects for the internationally endorsed two-state solution. World leaders from France to Morocco to the EU weighed in as well, urging President Trump to postpone moving the embassy. Jordan's King Abdullah said the move would stoke tensions among Muslims and Christians alike. And Saudi Arabia, who's been supportive of Trump, warned of gravely negative consequences, including provoking the global Muslim community, which some see as a veiled warning about the potential eruption of another intifada. While Turkey's President Tayyip Erdogan said the move to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital is a red line.
Our struggle on this matter will continue with resolve. As a matter of fact, this can go as far as breaking off our diplomatic relations with Israel.
Despite the international condemnation for Israel's conservative Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, this is a major victory. But it also comes with the potential for unrest. President Trump had hoped to launch a new round of U.S.-led peace negotiations next year, but those talks now look in doubt.
For 3 decades, the U.S. has taken the lead in the Middle East peace process, but Palestinians now say that the U.S. recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital puts and undermines the U.S.'s role as a peace broker in the region. Bret?
Connor Powell live in Jerusalem. Connor, thank you. Back in Washington, more reaction to President Trump's decision on Israel. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is with us now on the North Lawn. Good evening, John.
Well, good evening to you. You'll remember that many times during the election campaign, President Trump said that other presidents had promised to move the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, but that he was going to be the one to finally do it. And despite all that opposition that you saw from world leaders, the White House says the president is, quote, pretty solid in his thinking. The news about the pending embassy move came on yet another busy day here at the White House, one that included another push to get tax reform across the finish line.
It's a tremendous bill for jobs and for the middle class.
With the Senate and House setting the process to reconcile the tax reform bills in Congress, President Trump kept up the drumbeat to get it done in time for Christmas, meeting with several Senate Republicans for lunch today.
The taxes we're so thrilled about, so popular, and I think something is going to be coming out of conference pretty quickly as opposed to long term. I think it's going to go pretty quickly. We're all on the same page. There's a great spirit in the Republican Party like I've never seen before.
The statement about unity was somewhat ironic, considering Arizona Senator Jeff Flake, whom the president has consistently derided, was seated uncomfortably to his left.
Mr. President,
thank you.
Thank you so much.
Later, meeting with small business owners and their families, President Trump touted the benefits of tax reform for the American engine that truly drives job creation.
They want to see tax cuts. They want to see jobs. They want to have choice. You know, in education, we talk about choice. Well, we want choice in jobs also. So you can look for 5 jobs or 6 jobs, not just take one because that's all you could get.
The White House House is hoping to keep the conference process narrowly focused on a handful of issues to get it done quickly. President Trump wants the bill on his desk the week of December 18th, in part in case the Alabama Senate race goes to the Democrat, which would further shrink the margin tax reform needs to pass if it gets pushed to January. President Trump has taken the controversial step of endorsing Republican candidate Roy Moore in Alabama. The president and Republican National Committee have decided better to endorse and support Moore than face the prospect of losing the seat to a Democrat.
I think he's going to do very well. We don't want to have a liberal Democrat in Alabama, believe me. We want strong borders. We want stopping crime. We want to have the things that we represent, and we certainly don't want to have a liberal Democrat that's controlled by Nancy Pelosi and controlled by Chuck Schumer.
After the president made his case, Senator Flake left the lunch and revealed he wrote a $100 check to Moore's opponent, Doug Jones. On the check, Flake wrote, "Country over party." Asked why the president went all in on endorsing Moore, Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders said it's all about the president's agenda.
The president feels that he would rather have a person that supports his agenda versus somebody who opposes his agenda every step of the way.
And the White House today pushed back hard on reports special counsel Robert Mueller had subpoenaed Deutsche Bank for records of the president's financial dealings. Early this afternoon, a source with knowledge of the investigation told Fox News Mueller's office had sent no such subpoena. Later, the president's outside counsel, Jay Sekulow, said on the record, quote, "We have confirmed that the news reports that the special counsel had subpoenaed financial records related to the president are false." Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who typically defers to outside counsel on such questions, was only too happy to repeat the findings.
No subpoena has been issued or received. We've confirmed this with the bank and other sources. I think that this is another example of the media going too far too fast, and we don't see it going in that direction.
The president has previously said on several occasions that if Mueller's investigation strayed into an examination of his personal finances, that would be a violation of the special counsel's mandate. That the president has also said on several occasions he has no intention to fire Mueller, and sources tell Fox News the last thing his legal team wants is a brand new special counsel to be appointed and start the process all over again from scratch. Brett?
John Roberts live on the North Lawn tonight. John, thanks. We're learning new details tonight about what the Trump transition team knew about Lieutenant General Michael Flynn's contacts with the Russian ambassador in the days between the election and inauguration. This comes as there is new concern about possible bias among members of the special counsel's team. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge has details tonight.
A top prosecutor who now works for special counsel Robert Mueller's Russia probe praised then acting Attorney General Sally Yates after she was fired in January by President Trump for refusing to defend his controversial travel ban. The email obtained by Judicial Watch through a federal lawsuit shows that on the night of January 30th, Andrew Weissman wrote to Yates under the subject line, "I am so proud." He continued, "and in awe. Thank you so much. All my deepest respects." The disclosure follows confirmation that another investigator, FBI official Peter Strzok, was fired from Mueller's probe over the summer after allegedly sending anti-Trump texts.
It's not good for the FBI, which holds itself up as a paragon of virtue, where there's no political motivations and we just follow the facts.
Separately, 24 emails provided to the special counsel and obtained by Fox News show the Trump transition team knew former National Security Advisor Mike Flynn was in regular contact with Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak before the inauguration. But the records also suggest Flynn did not disclose the full extent of his conversations about sanctions imposed by the Obama administration for Russia's meddling in the 2016 election. A day after the Washington Post first reported Flynn's late December phone call with Kislyak, Flynn's deputy K.T. McFarland advised 3 topics in call, from condolence to Russians for the assassination of a diplomat to scheduling a congrats call between the Russian president and Mr. Trump to a conference on Syria. Flynn pled guilty Friday to lying to the FBI about the call. Also on January 13th, Flynn gave a similar explanation to another transition official. "I'm trying to establish a relationship and set up a post-inauguration call between Presidents Trump and Putin, but nothing was agreed to." At the time, the State Department spokesman said there was no issue with transition team outreach to foreign leaders, including Russia.
We stand ready if they want to work through the State Department to contact some of these individuals, but we have no comment or no problem with them doing such on their own.
Flynn's legal team has been silent about Friday's guilty plea. Contacted by Fox News, Flynn's lawyer had nothing to add about the fired FBI agent who oversaw Flynn's interviews and the possible legal impact. Bret?
Catherine, thank you. House and Senate negotiators are about to start working on a unified tax reform bill. But there was not a lot of compromise in the air on Capitol Hill today. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel tells us where things stand right now.
This is monumental reform, and we're doing it the right way.
But on the routine vote to approve a tax reform conference, some House conservatives nearly blew it up.
The House will come to order.
Republican leadership supports a 2-week government funding extension to buy more time to finish up year-end fiscal issues. Members of the Conservative Freedom Caucus were fighting for an extension until December 30th, feeling like the holiday rush can produce lousy deals.
Usually we load up the Christmas tree at the end of the year with Democrat votes. We want to avoid that scenario.
Late today, Freedom Caucus members acknowledged rank-and-file Republicans don't support a longer extension. Now the expectation is there will be a vote on what Speaker Ryan wanted, a clean, continuing resolution.
I feel like we're going to have a majority. We're going to have 218 for passing the CR we had this week. We're having a good conversation with our members.
The Senate Majority Leader also didn't show any interest in shifting gears.
What we anticipate is a 2-week CR into December 22nd. Which ought to give us a little room to talk about provisions that are going to be part of the year-end spending measure.
That sets the stage for a meeting of the big 4 members of Congress with President Trump on Thursday after Democrats Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi backed out of last week's meeting.
We showed the president no games. This is serious stuff. We think he learned, and he invited us back this week.
On tax reform, with Republicans more unified, Democrats sound more desperate.
It is the end of the road. This health care, the debate on health care is life-death. This is Armageddon.
Key Republicans are countering the argument coming from Democrats.
When we get into this conference committee, we're going to be talking about making strong families, strong futures, and giving the next generation a tax code that actually helps them.
GOP leadership sources say Republicans share the same goals on policy. At the end of the year, there was just a disagreement on tactics, and most didn't see any advantage to saving fights until just after Christmas. Bret?
Mike Emanuel on the Hill. Mike, thanks. Let's get some analysis now from former House Speaker Newt Gingrich, author of the new book, Understanding Trump. He joins us from Arlington, Virginia tonight. Mr. Speaker, thanks for being here.
Oh, Bret, it's good to be with you.
You know, listen, you've been through a number of these battles, these fiscal cliffs in your time. How do you look at this about, one, getting tax reform across the finish line, whether Republicans can do that, and two, dealing with all of the loose ends on funding the government?
Well, they'll both be a little bit of a mess. The tax bill will be less of a mess. I think they're very close to working out a deal. I think they probably will meet the president's goal of getting it on his desk the week of the 18th. I think that's very good for the American economy. We're already up above 3% real growth. I think with this tax bill coming into effect next year, I wouldn't be at all surprised to see us get to 4%, which means more jobs, more take-home pay. Really a good news for the Republicans going into the election. I think on the end of the year process, a 2-week clean continuing resolution, if the Democrats will agree to it in the Senate. I agree that Speaker Ryan, he can pass it in the House. If they can get an agreement to do that in the Senate, then you're going to have, as soon as the tax bill's over, you're going to have about a week of really hard-nosed negotiating. They're going to have to get some Democratic votes. I suspect it'll leave some Republicans unhappy. But in the end, I think no one has an interest in closing the government, and so I suspect they will finally, around the 22nd, 23rd, 24th. I once was here at Christmas Eve, still voting, so I wouldn't be shocked if it took them that long, but I think they'll get it done.
Yeah, Obamacare was Christmas Eve as well on the Senate side. Let me ask you about where Democrats are, because there's some criticism that they say the Republican Party of old is now hypocritical. Here is Congressman Maloney today.
New rule. After today, the Republican Party can choose to support massive new debts, and it can support politicians who abuse kids, but it cannot lecture the rest of us about it. The rest of us have listened to our last lecture from Republicans about family values or fiscal discipline. From now on, that party has no credibility on either issue.
Speaker Gingrich.
Well, first of all, without getting off onto all sorts of innuendo, I would say the news of the last couple of weeks, the Democrats aren't in much position to lecture anybody about personal behavior. But in terms of long-term growth, look, Ronald Reagan convinced the Republican Party, along with Jack Kemp, back in the late 1970s, that economic growth, a bigger economy, more revenue, was the key to the future. And Reagan launched what was almost 20 years of economic growth. People had more take-home pay. They had a better future. As the president said in the earlier segment that you had, Brett, when people get to choose between 4, 5, or 6 jobs, they're a lot happier than if there's only one job or no job available. So the Republican gamble is very straightforward. If you stimulate the economy, if you encourage small business, if you give tax cuts to the middle class, can you get so much economic growth that you begin to move America back on a track where the sheer size of the revenue stream begins to pay down the debt? We did it in the 90s. I'm the only speaker in modern history to author 4 straight balanced budgets. We know it can work because it did work. I think Paul Ryan has the same goal, and I think that President Trump has that goal. It'll take 5 or 6 years. But if this economy starts to roar, you're going to see a flood of money come in, and you're going to see, because the economy's bigger, not because we raised taxes, but because we created jobs.
Let me ask you about this investigation and where you see it, the Mueller investigation, what we're learning about his team, past and present, and where it is going.
This is a level of corruption and dishonesty beyond anything I would have expected a year ago. You take everything that happened with Hillary Clinton, the fact that they deliberately interviewed her without putting her under oath, and you take everything she did, and it's General Flynn, who served his country in uniform for 35 years, who's guilty. He's guilty of what? Apparently of not being totally accurate in describing an interview which probably the FBI actually had a tape of. Talk about a setup. I think that Michael Ledeen wrote an article today that was exactly right. Flynn was faced with bankruptcy. He was faced with a threat legally to his son. He cut a deal to get it over with. I think it is a sad day for America when the Federal Bureau of Investigation allows itself to be this corrupt. I cannot imagine that any American believes that if the same standard had been applied to Hillary Clinton, that she wouldn't have been found guilty over and over and over. But it wasn't the same standard, and we now know why. You have members of the FBI who are actively anti-Trump, actively pro-Hillary.
I want to just play one quick soundbite. A lot of the focus has been on this Logan Act and about the incoming administration and the Trump team in transition reaching out to foreign governments. This is a soundbite from Mark Toner, the spokesperson from the State Department, 7 days before the inauguration of President Trump, being asked about all of this.
This building doesn't see anything necessarily inappropriate about contacts between members of the incoming administration and foreign officials, no matter what country they're from, right?
No. And again, this has been ongoing. I mean, we stand ready if they want to work through the State Department to contact some of these individuals.
There seems to be a disconnect.
Brett, listen, you'd have no reason to know this, but I actually used the Logan Act in the 1980s. The Logan Act was written in 1798 in order to stop American citizens from negotiating against their own government. But Flynn was the nominated national security advisor of a newly elected president. He was not approaching the Russians as a private citizen. He was approaching the Russians at the direction of the president-elect in his role as a member of a government transition team. So the Logan Act would never apply to Flynn, and it's an absurdity to suggest that it would. That's why these things, and I warned about this months ago, this is what happened to a very, very good friend of mine, Scooter Libby, who worked for Dick Cheney. If the FBI wants to get you, they take something, in this case they probably had a tape because they had been following the Russian ambassador. They know exactly what was said. You deviate one word, and suddenly it's your fault. The fact is, Karl Rove wrote a column in which he said he almost got indicted for, quote, not remembering. Now, that's how sick it gets.
Speaker, I got to leave it there.
We're watching one, Okay. Thank you.
Well, we're hitting a hard break here, but we really appreciate your time and your assessment as always. The end of the line for the longest serving member of the House. That is coming up after the break. Border crossings have plunged to a 45-year low, while arrests by deportation officers have soared since President Trump took office. Those are the highlights from figures released today by Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. The Border Patrol made almost 311,000 arrests during the fiscal year ending September 30th. That's down 25% from a year earlier and the lowest level since 1971. ICE officers made 143,000 arrests for deportation, a 25% increase. Stocks were down today. The Dow lost 109. The S&P 500 dropped 10. The Nasdaq fell 13. A steady stream of sexual harassment allegations has taken down Michigan Democratic Congressman John Conyers, who was the longest-serving member of Congress. He announced his retirement today. Correspondent Matt Flynn has the story and reaction from Detroit.
I am retiring today, and I want everyone to know how much I appreciate the support, the incredible, undiminished support I've received across the years.
The longest-serving member of the U.S. House of Representatives, 88-year-old Democrat John Conyers, announced he's stepping down amid sexual harassment allegations and poor health. At least 3 women, including former aide Marion Brown, allege Conyers sexually harassed them. Conyers denies their claims. The congressman did agree to a $27,000 settlement with Brown, but Conyers' attorney says it was not an admission of guilt, but a settlement to spare everyone expensive litigation. The announcement from the Dean of the House rippling through Washington.
This is a sad end to a long career, but I hope that we will not forget what he has contributed to our country.
I did call for his resignation last week early, but I do believe that we as Democrats have the obligation to make sure that we are consistent.
Conyers endorsed his son to take his seat, but he cannot appoint his successor. That's up to voters. Conyers planned to submit a letter of retirement to the governor, who will then determine the process for a special election. Conyers' attorney and supporters bashing House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi for initially calling Conyers an icon, then flip-flopping and calling for his resignation.
It's not a good day in Democratic politics, and they're going to rue the day that they didn't stand behind John Conyers.
Conyers' family spokesperson and his attorney will not comment directly on Conyers' health condition, but say he is still in the hospital here in the Detroit area. Brett?
Matt Flynn in Detroit. Matt, thank you. Up next, religious freedom versus freedom from discrimination. The Supreme Court hears a significant case. We'll bring you that. First, what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 11 in Los Angeles, where ferocious winds are whipping up an explosive wildfire that has prompted evacuation orders for nearly 8,000 homes. At least 150 structures and 46,000 acres have burned so far. One firefighter has been injured. Fire is also being blamed for a car accident that killed one person. WDRB in Louisville as China lifts a ban on importing Kentucky racehorses. For the last 2 years, China put a hold on trading live horses with the U.S. over concerns about the spread of disease. And this is a live look at Chicago, where the big story from Fox 32, our affiliate there, is former President Obama's address to a mayor's conference. The subject, climate change. Mr. Obama says cities, states, and nonprofit groups have emerged as what he calls the new face of leadership on climate change. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back. Supreme Court justices heard arguments today on whether the Masterpiece Cake Shop Bakery in Colorado can be forced to make a wedding cake for a same-sex couple. It is a case that has the potential to affect many individuals and businesses and set a precedent in gay rights or religious freedom. My colleague and anchor of Fox News at Night, Shannon Bream, has details.
We got your back, Jack!
Heated debate inside and outside the Supreme Court today.
Equal justice under law.
In a dispute over the rights of a Christian baker who declined to make a custom wedding cake for a same-sex couple, though he offered to sell them pre-made goods in his shop. Jack Phillips says he is an artist and that the government cannot compel his speech or force him to endorse a message that is in direct conflict with his religious beliefs. Couple Charlie Craig and David Mullen say this isn't about cake.
This is about freedom. Freedom for LGBT people to live full lives in public and not in constant fear that they will be denied basic service in businesses, fired from their jobs, or lose their homes just for who they are.
During today's often contentious arguments, Justice Sonia Sotomayor questioned the baker's claims. Quote, "There are sandwich artists now. There are people who create beauty in what they make, but we still don't call it expressive and entitled to First Amendment protection." But when advocates tried to equate Phillips' actions to those who once denied service on the basis of race, Chief Justice John Roberts noted that when the Supreme Court decided its landmark same-sex marriage case just 2 years ago, quote, "It went out of its way to talk about the decent and honorable people who may have opposing views." Justice Anthony Kennedy, who has often ruled in favor of LGBT interests, was tough on both sides today, but raised eyebrows when he said this. Counselor, tolerance is essential in a free society, and tolerance is most meaningful when it's mutual. It seems to me that the state in its position here has been neither tolerant nor respectful of Mr. Phillips' religious beliefs.
It's hard to believe that the government is forcing me to choose between providing for my family and employees and violating my relationship with God. That is not freedom. That is not tolerance.
Attorneys for Phillips say every American should be concerned if the court rules that the government can compel individuals to speak in a way that offends their beliefs, while attorneys for the other side argue that business owners who enter the stream of commerce can't pick and choose their customers. A decision is due by June. Brett.
We'll follow this case in Fox News at Night, 11 p.m. Eastern Time. Shannon, thanks. President Trump's lawyers are asking a court in New York to drop a lawsuit involving past claims of sexual misconduct during the production of The Apprentice TV show. Senior correspondent Rick Leventhal has that story.
The events never happened. Never. All of these liars will be sued after the election is over.
During his campaign, President Trump repeatedly denied allegations of unwanted sexual advances made by more than a dozen women, including former Apprentice contestant Summer Zervos.
He then grabbed my shoulder and began kissing me again very aggressively and placed his hand on my breast.
These allegations are 100% false, as everybody. They're made up. They never happened.
Today, Zervos got her day in court with oral arguments in a defamation lawsuit she filed against the president just days before he took office.
As we have alleged in our lawsuit, she has been threatened. She has been financially harmed. She's been subjected to very abusive and unwarranted and false attacks.
The president's lawyers are arguing against precedent. In 1997, the Supreme Court ruled unanimously that Paula Jones' civil case could move forward, leading to President Clinton becoming the first sitting president to ever give testimony in a civil case in which he was the defendant. Mr. Trump's lawyers say the Jones case applies only to federal, not state courts. They want the case dismissed, in part because political speech is protected by the First Amendment. If the judge rules the case has merit, the president could be compelled to answer questions under oath.
I think that's a difficult one, but I could see a judge saying, I just don't want to touch this, and I don't want something to go forward when it's going to look like we're censoring political speech.
If you were going to bet, would you bet on your side? I never bet. I'm just not a gambler that way.
The president's attorneys left without comment, but during the hearing made it clear they don't believe state court has any jurisdiction in this matter or any matter involving a sitting president, saying the Constitution forbids it. The judge says she will e-file her decision, but didn't say when that might happen. Brett?
Rick Leventhal live in New York. Rick, thanks. Up next, the president's bold move in Israel will get reaction from the panel. First, beyond our borders tonight, protesters broke into Greece's labor ministry and fought with police outside the prime minister's office in Athens. They're upset about a new agreement